everybody.
Hello.
We're joined once again by a lovely special guest, Ella, who's been on the show before, second time returnee. Ella's now a ttrpg game designer with a brand new game called Upriver Downriver, which you can now support on Kickstarter up until next Friday. So go check that out. Welcome back to the show, Ella.
Thank you very much. I am very excited to be here.
We're very excited to hear your presentation because we very much enjoyed your presentation on King Arthur.
Thank you. I fucking love medieval Welsh literature. Wait, am I allowed to swear?
Yeah.
I feel like I am, but I just had a sudden moment where I was like, I need to check this. I'm sorry. I've done too many Twitch streams recently where they've been like, no swearing, and I'm like, what do you mean?
We did speak about like trying not to swear so much, but we
Yeah.
really struggled. All three of us struggled to not put at least a little bit of a fuck in there.
Yeah.
If you didn't see the video on Truth and the Mabinogi and Kiloka Golwen, my pronouns are she, her. I also make podcasts, but the game design is kind of the big thing. And I am talking today about a boat because my game is about boats. You sail on a magical river and draw tarot cards and do all sorts of fun queer found family bonding. Because what is a boat if not a container for a found family?
What's the difference between a boat and a ship?
Oh man, I mean, I don't think there is one, but I am also a dinghy sailor, not a naval sailor. And I'm pretty sure that if you speak to someone like a naval officer or like genuinely, like a real sailor, then you would.
I feel like you would annoy people by saying that. So let's just say that there's no difference between a boat and a ship.
Confirmed. That's going in the quiz. That's going in the quiz.
Yeah. Like it's a whole thing. I'm such a casual gamer fan of boats and sailing. Like, I am a sailor, so I'm a qualified sailing instructor. I've sailed across the North Sea in the tall ships race on a tall ship.
That's so cool.
I have canoed. Thank you. Yeah, I sailed like 700 miles. We started off at 3 a.m. in a storm. That was a wild beginning to a tall ships race. And I've canoed 200 miles across the Danish Limfjord from one ocean to the other. And so I'm a big fan of boats. But in many ways, I'm a casual sailor fan rather than like a pro. Like there's a couple of professional sailors who I've met who so far seem to have enjoyed how excited I am about sailing, but definitely no more than me. So I'm just gonna disclaim that now.
By the way, I do want to say we were talking about Upriver Downriver as though like I don't know anything about it, and then you said that thing about what is a ship but a place to contain found family, and I was like, oh my gosh, I played that game and it was so nice and so heartwarming and compelling, and yeah, that needs to be said before I just move on. And so like it's yeah.
My favourite sailor is Sailor Moon. Is Sailor Moon in your game?
Oh, I mean, I love Sailor Moon. Tragically not, because it's more of a like historical fantasy kind of. I mean, it's set in fantasy history times, so some part... I'm not sure I should keep this in, but, like, basically, I was like, what I really enjoy is the fantasy historical, like, ahistorical period that people writing in, like, the 1900s to the 1940s kind of created, but then with like a modern twist where, you know, like queer people and women and people of colour have rights. But that kind of Lord of the Rings, C.S. Lewis sort of, but also some folk tales like East of the Sun and West of the Moon by Kay Nielsen kind of idea of this quite dreamlike archetypal landscape. And actually because Rach was one of the first playtesters, his ideas about like dwarves and the dwarves in our game actually massively made it into the manual and is now canon in the world of the game. So the way that dwarven magic works in our game was a Rach original.
I think they're kind of Welsh.
They're a little bit Welsh as well, yeah.
Because my character was named Rod.
Nice. Rod.
Yeah. and we had like really wanted to call a part of the river the Glass Road, because glass is one of my favourite words, which is a Welsh word for colour. It literally means as grey as the cliffs, as green as the grass, and as blue as the sky, all at the same time. Glass.
That's lovely.
And yeah, I think it's a beautiful, beautiful word, and so part of the river in my game is called the Glass Road, right, because, you know, on the one hand, glass, but also glass like the colour.
That's so nice.
Those are different colours.
Yeah, well, I mean, but if you think about like
water,
the way, the water in the sky in parts of England, you know, like on those kind of grey days, well, it does go kind of grey, green, blue, and you do have that kind of blurring into like teal and different like flushes and stuff. And I think like it makes a lot of sense for that to be a word that came out of the British Isles, because the British Isles is predominantly glass in colour, I think.
Well, let's talk about this ship then.
Mm. Yes! So, the Vasa ship. This is my favourite shipwreck. Originally Vasen. Vasa or Vasen essentially means like a sheaf of wheat, which is a quite humble origin for the name of the ship, because it was commissioned by King Gustavus Adolphus of Sweden. And the reason it has this name is because that was his family name. He was from the House of Vasa. And it was actually... Originally, the ship was called Vasen, but it's come to be known as Vasa because the Vasa Museum, which we will get into later, started calling it Vasa.
I went there.
Yes!
I went to the museum.
Did you see the picture of Arnold Schwarzenegger?
No.
Because there is randomly, and I don't know why, but I double-checked this to see if I was just going mad, and a couple of bloggers have written about it. They've just got a picture of Arnold Schwarzenegger from Conan the Barbarian on the wall. No connection to the museum or the ship. It's just a black and white picture.
Why not?
It makes me very happy. But yeah, they named it Vasa to kind of make it more in line with modern Swedish linguistics, basically, because this was a ship that was built in the 1600s. So, next slide, please. I'm sorry, Jen started doing it in the videos, and now every time I'm like, I want to do it too. Okay, so we're going to actually start with a different ship. But this is just as a point of comparison. So, the Vasa was a Swedish warship built between 1626 and 1638 under orders by King Gustavus Adolphus the Great. She represented the king's ambitions for Sweden and himself, and on her completion she was one of the most powerfully armed vessels in the world. She had 64 guns, which gave her roughly the equivalent firepower of the USS Constitution, which was a boat built over 130 years later, which was crucial in winning the American Civil War. And the Constitution is what you can see here. She's very pretty. She was built at the end of the 1700s and most recently sailed in 2012, so, you know, that's cool. So the Vasa was actually supposed to have even more guns than this, to a grand total of 72, but those weren't made in time. The other important thing to mention here is that in the 1600s, naval battles didn't work the way that we kind of imagine them in pop culture, which is, you know, where you see two ships coming alongside each other and then opening fire with a bunch of cannons, that kind of classic image. That is a much more modern, naval tactic. In the 1600s, they were still working on the objective of a ship battle was to get to the other person's ship and board it. So the priority was for your ship to be small and maneuverable rather than having lots of cannons, because lots of cannons obviously slow it down and make it heavier in the water.
Because they don't want to waste the boat. They want to get the booty.
Yeah, no.
The booty.
That makes sense.
But so the reason that I'm mentioning that now is that, so the Vasa had loads of guns and was very dangerous, and was so dangerous that she was as dangerous as ships built like nearly 200 years later. But she, because of this whole thing about like what ships were used for and whether they were supposed to come up alongside and open fire or whether they were supposed to be fast and maneuverable, she actually had guns 360 degrees around the boat, which is not normal for a ship. So basically it meant from any angle she could shoot like anything, which was very ridiculous, but we'll get into that. Okay, so the big GA. Love this guy. I don't love him, but I am entertained by him. She was meant, the Vasa was not just incredibly explosive, she was also meant to be the flagship of King Gustavus Adolphus's fleet, who I'm just going to start referring to as the big GA, because I don't want to say King Gustavus Adolphus every single time I have to mention him, and I'm going to have to mention him a lot. Vasa was covered in sculptures and painted in red, blue, and gold leaf. Her style was more medieval than Baroque, which means like vivid clashing colours all over. I don't know if you've ever seen kind of recreations of what medieval churches would have looked like, but they wouldn't have looked kind of grey stone. They would have been very brightly coloured, like red and blue and green, and painted all over on the inside. So they would have been like Technicolor, like York Minster would have been incredibly bright.
That surprises me. I mean, I wouldn't have thought to go looking at medieval churches, but my sort of understanding of churches is that they're a bit boring because God ain't like they didn't. My understanding of like old timey religion is that they didn't want it to be fun.
Yeah, so actually that's all the rest. That's all the Reformation. That's 1500s. Pre-1500s, they were all about like festival of colors. The idea is that God is like bright, and you've got lots and lots of color to show off wealth and plenty and fruit and life and everything wonderful by the glory of God, etc. and so forth. Also, fun fact, kind of sad fact, Britain used to have a lot of really beautiful Renaissance sculptures and paintings that would have been like similar, we believe, to kind of the stuff that you can find in France and Italy now, except they were all burned and destroyed in the Reformation as well. So that's why we feel like churches are supposed to be boring, but actually medieval churches, lots of bright colours. They were big fans of bright pigments. So on this boat, 1600s, Sweden, lots and lots of bright colours, and nearly 500 sculptures on this ship, because it was a flagship, so there were so many. There were lots of lions, there were several Roman emperors, there were griffins, Hercules made an appearance, and so did the big GA himself.
So they just thought, you know what, we want our nice manoeuvrable ship to be as heavy as possible, to be... stick a bunch of marble on there.
Yeah, well, they were wooden sculptures, but still, like, it would have added weight. It was very much, and so it's at this point that we kind of need to take a brief tangent to contextualize. The big GA had taken Sweden in the 1600s from being a sparsely populated, poor country of relatively little influence on to one of the major continental powers. And that was largely because of its naval prowess in the Baltic, which is what the background of all these slides is. And this has been referred to as the Stormaktstiden, or Age of Greatness. Swedish historians describe Sweden at this time as one of the most militarized states in history, and Gustavus Adolphus is considered to be one of the most successful Swedish kings in terms of warfare. He won, in particular, a very big and famous battle for the Protestants in the 30 Years' War, called the Battle of Breitenfeld. So, yeah. I'm now just gonna go
Gus, eh? Classic Gus.
Classic Gus. I mean, it's at this point that I want to take just a brief tangent, because my favourite thing about Gustavus Adolphus is that he was King Christina's father. I don't know if you're all familiar with King Christina.
No, I've never heard of King Christina.
She is the fucking bomb.
I think I have heard of her too, because of my Swedish friend Mia Mulder, who is a historian and taught me about her.
Yay! No, so King Christina is amazing. A lot of historians think that she might have been intersex. She might have been trans, specifically genderqueer. She really enjoyed presenting in like various kind of traditionally gendered ways. So she would wear trousers, she would wear men's uniforms, she would go out riding, but like in the men's way. We definitely know that she had a lot of female lovers, like a lot, with whom she wrote many letters. She was also famously like a really brilliant scholar, an incredible sword fighter, just this incredibly cool genderqueer lesbian, king of Sweden in like the 1600s. So just brief queer history side note, because I love her so much, and yeah, she's the bomb. Okay, back to the presentation.
That's a lot of ships.
That is a lot of ships, right? Now, what if I were to tell you they all sank?
Oh.
No.
It's bad.
That's a lot of crosses over the ships.
Yeah. You can tell that I spend a lot of time on this.
You put animations in. Yes, I fancy.
I was so excited to be asked back. I was like,
gotta animate my slides.
Yeah. So when the Vasa was built, Christina's father, the big GA, had been in power for more than a decade, and Sweden was at war with Poland, Lithuania. Sweden wasn't doing well in that war in the 1620s, so 10 ships had been run aground in a storm. The admiral's flagship, the Tiger, had been captured, and the Sun was blown up by her own crew when it was boarded and nearly captured. In 1628, yeah. In 1628, 3 more ships were lost in less than a month. So, and then of course, given this was the 1600s, there were a bunch of other like wars and skirmishes happening like across Europe. Notably, the 30 Years' War was happening in Germany, which was shortly going to hit Sweden.
Did they call it the 30 Years' War when it started, or only when it hit 30 years?
I think that's what we as historians have retroactively called it, to distinguish it from the other wars happening at the time.
Because if I went into a war and it was like year 2 and they were calling it a 30-year war, I'd be sort of trying to find a way out. I'd try and find a way out, right?
I mean, this also always makes me think about the 100 Years' War, where like, you know, if you're a soldier who comes of age in like year 90 of the 100 Years' War, you can't be feeling good about that.
Like, that's like getting COVID in 2021. It's like, I managed to survive an entire year of COVID, and then I bloody get it in June 2021.
Just like rage, manage to get double vaccinated, still get COVID.
It's just a bit embarrassing, really, isn't it?
So basically, King Gustavus Adolphus really needed a big gunship, not just because he literally needed it to fight battles, but also because he needed to make a big political statement where he was like, look, we're not to be fucked with, you know, don't take us on kind of thing. Sweden continues to be important, etc. Then this one, I forgot about these. Remember, as I mentioned before, that at this time the focus in naval battles was on light, fast-moving ships and boarding your enemies rather than shooting them from one side. People saw ships as vehicles for soldiers, not weapons in their own right. But the big GA saw the potential for ships as basically big gun platforms. And after Vasa ordered 5 more similar models, which were called Regelskep, or royal ships, Applet, the apple, Kronen, the crown, Scepter, and Gotha Ark, the Ark of Gothenburg.
Scepter, as in like the musician Scepter?
No, I'm sorry, I've mispronounced scepter, like the thing that a monarch has.
I was just going to say, like, that's very sort of fortuitous for them to name a ship after a 21st century musician.
He woke up one night in a sweat and he was like, I know what we have to name this ship. But Krona and Scepter were actually very successful flagships of the Swedish Navy and served for the next 30 years. But when the king died in 1632, the Privy Council cancelled the orders for any more large gunships, which I do think is like really heavy shade. Like, I recognise that at this point in history the Privy Council was essentially like in charge of banking for the nation, but I do quite enjoy that the king was like, I'm going to order these ships, and then they're like, we are going to wait until you are dead, and then we are going to cancel those orders, and those ships will never happen. And
did they used to call him the Gus ship? Who likes the gunships? No, there's a pun there somewhere, isn't there? What I'm saying is workshop something around gun and Gus being a little bit the same.
Let us know in the comments what you come up with.
Right, so coming back to the Vasa, the big GA correctly deduced that ships could do a lot more damage with cannons than they can trying to board one another. And this is kind of prescient because, like I said, what happens in naval history is that over time, like, that does become the prevailing tactic, that you pull up alongside another ship and fire at them with your cannons, at least in like the 1800s. And so at this point he's embroiled in a decades-long naval battle with Poland and Lithuania. He's recently lost a lot of boats, including flagships. He doesn't just need a military edge, he needs a statement piece again. So he commissions a boat, and I've included a diagram here because I don't know if you'll know what I mean when I say a ship heels.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how much sailing
I
you've
can
done,
figure
as you
it
can see.
out from the image for sure.
Image.
Yeah.
The image really explains it.
Yeah.
So healing in a very small boat can be really fun. It's kind of if you've ever seen like images or videos of people sailing in small boats where like there's a whole bunch of people on one side of the ship. I think there's an advert in London you see quite a lot like that. But in a big boat, yeah, it is. It's honestly a great time. Would recommend. But in a big ship is a real problem because you need stability. So the bottom of a ship is its hull, and down here you have essentially a keel, and the keel acts like an anchor to stop the ship from like shaking in the water. It essentially acts like a dead weight at the bottom of the ship to keep it steady. So when it tilts, the keel kind of counterbalances. But if you have a shallow hull, then the ship has a lot less stability because it doesn't have that kind of counterbalance going on. And if your ship is very heavy and has lots of stuff inside it, then that's a big problem. So Gustavus Adolphus commissions Henrik Hebertson, a Dutch-born master shipbuilder, Master Heinrich, to build him a boat. Master Heinrich signs the contract in 1625 and begins work. In January 1628, the big GA himself visits the ship, and that summer, Captain Suffering Hansen arranged for the ship's stability to be demonstrated to Vice Admiral Fleming. So 30 men ran back and forth across the deck to start the ship rolling, which is just basically heeling one way to the other. It's the classic boats tipping up and down. Exactly, Jen is demonstrating it beautifully. But the men who were running backwards and forwards to make the ship rock were stopped after just 3 trips as the Admiral feared the ship would capsize. This, I would contest, is a problem. This was because she had a very shallow hull and was very narrow for all the guns and cargo she was expected to carry. That, in turn, meant that she had almost no stability in the water. Next slide.
This feels like foreshadowing. There's a thing called Chekhov's gun, and if you mention something, then it's probably going to come up later.
I'm saying nothing. So I actually counted there are 72 clip art guns on this slide.
Wow.
The big GA, meanwhile, was away at war in Poland, and he'd been sending a continuous stream of letters demanding that the ship be put to sea as soon as possible. He ordered 72 24-pound guns for the ship in 1626. This required the building of 2 gun decks instead of 1, which was something that Master Henrik the shipwright had never done before. He died halfway through building the ship, and the job was taken over by his widow, Margareta Nielsdotter.
That's really cool that his widow took it on after he died.
Mm.
Yeah, I mean, I wish I could meet this kind of badass shipwright woman in the 1600s who's just like, oh yeah, I'm just going to be in charge of building the Swedish Navy's, flagship.
Yeah.
Like, that's a thing I can do.
She was the mastermind the whole time.
Yeah, but then, I don't know,
Like,
I want to...
No, 72 guns, 72 guns.
It's honestly... There's much debate about the building of the ship, but we'll get into that. Whilst Vasa was neither the largest ship ever built, nor the one with the greatest number of guns, she was arguably the most powerful warship of the time. So she could fire 588 pounds or 267 kilograms of explosives at the same time, and that's not including all of her guns. And I tried to find a good comparison to help you, conceptualize this, and what I came up with was that is about 2 reindeers worth of bullets being shot simultaneously.
But by weight or by volume?
Reindeers.
By weight.
Okay. That's a lot.
Yeah.
Why, since when have reindeers been a measurement?
Well, it's just I don't...
It's heading towards...
I was trying
They're big, aren't they?
Yeah, I was trying to find something that weighed roughly this much, and it turns out about about 2 reindeers. Yeah, about two reindeers is this. Yeah. So just imagine a reindeer and then replace it with bullets and grenades, and then imagine them all being shot out 360 degrees at the same time.
Didn't even want 1 pigeon's worth of bullets.
Right.
No.
That's too much.
I don't
for me.
want to be near even that many.
I didn't realise Santa was getting so militarised.
He's got a lot to protect. A lot of
Problem
booty,
of our times.
as it were.
Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, turns out the red nose was just a laser dot sight.
I mean, we all knew that Santa was a capitalist stooge, so this was a natural development, I suppose. It's like his Pokemon evolution. Sorry.
Santa to massive weapons Santa.
Yeah, no, literally. Like, is that not just the American, like, the American imperial evolution of Santa is, like, from, like, from OG sort of theoretical pagan folkloric figure taken from Christianity into avatar of capitalism into American arms dealer Santa? Is that not just the final form?
He no longer
bottle with
travels
guns.
around in like he no longer travels around in a sleigh with his reindeers. He just delivers things by drone.
Yeah, oh no. You're right, but oh no. On the 10th of August 1628, Captain Suffering Hansen, who you might recognise from being the person who asked for the stability drill to be run in front of the Admiral, ordered the Vasa to depart on her maiden voyage to the naval station at Alvsnaben. The day was calm, there was only a light breeze, and a huge crowd was watching. Thousands of people in Stockholm, including foreign ambassadors. So at this point, I need some audience participation. Please, like, clap and cheer for the Vasa as she goes on her maiden voyage.
I'm like smashing bottles. I'm hooting and hollering.
Beautiful. Okay, and I'm gonna need some more kind of like acting in a minute. So Vasa was dragged by anchor along the eastern waterfront of the city to the southern side of the harbour. They were like, they were making a big show of it. All of her gun ports were open so that she could fire a salute as she left Stockholm. And as she was kind of started sailing, a gust of wind hit the ship, and she heeled suddenly to port, which is to say that she tipped over onto her left side very hard. So at this point, I need you all as my crowd to kind of like gasp and kind of like catch your breath as she kind of like tilts over.
I'm shocked.
But slowly, she righted herself and she was fine again. Okay, so now can I have some relieved sighs? Perfect. Beautiful. But then another gust hit, this time pushing her fully onto her port side. So now she was right angle with the sea. Water rushed in the open gun ports, and the Vasa sank in full view of thousands of people, 32 meters below the waves, just 120 meters from shore. After 2 years of building, she managed to sail roughly 1,400 yards.
I mean, that's more than I could sail.
If I were the widow, I would fully blame the husband for that.
Yeah.
Not my problem.
Yep, definitely. Of her crew of 445, 30 sailors were killed, but the rest were saved. So, all in all,
They were just like 100 meters out into sea, and people still died. What the?
Yeah, like, I think it's kind of a combination. I mean,
I guess
not,
they were
not
trapped
to be a little
inside.
dark. Yeah, like, it would have been like a combination of a lot of sailors in this period didn't know how to swim.
Wow.
That was like quite common. Where like it was just not a common skill that people had. So some of it will have been that, and the rest of it will have been gravity. Like when the ship started sinking, and also all of those cannons, that weight and the rushing of the water underneath the ship meant that if you were below decks, the physical pressure would have meant that it would have been almost impossible to get out from underneath. So some people would have been trapped. But mostly, 415 people survived. But unfortunately 30 sailors were killed. So less than 3 days after the disaster, they tried to get the ship out of the water, right? Because it was an extremely expensive endeavor. But she was stuck in the mud, and basically they couldn't physically get her out of the mud of the harbour. It took 300 years to get the Vasa out of the harbour. It only took 30 years to recover 50 of her guns with a team of Swedish and Finnish divers, which, just footnote, by the way, I think is really cool. Like, in the 1660s, a bunch of people in diving bell suits went down and, salvaged, 50 cannons from a shipwreck, which I just think is kind of wild to think about. For 300 years, in the centuries that Vasa sat in the harbour, she was added to maps for sailors. Several different people put in permits to salvage her and failed. Someone once dropped an anchor into her by accident. And apparently in the 1900s, Swedish naval officers did diving exercises on her shortly before World War I. But she was brought back out of the ocean in 1961, 333 years after she sank. And because of the anaerobic brackish water in which she'd sunk, which is a mix of fresh water and salt water, a lot of her organic material survived intact, which is actually really, really, really cool. From my perspective as a historian and archaeologist, it's amazing. We've got sails, we've got clothes, we've got games, we've got paper, we've got leather. We've even got some of the original paint from the ship. And that's actually separately a whole area of scientific debate. So some people think it might have been to do with the pollution of the harbour and the sulfuric acid in the water. But we're not sure. Either way, she is this incredible archaeological find, essentially a 4-story structure, completely intact, with everything, all of its original contents, exactly as it was 300 years ago, which is pretty cool. Archaeologists, when they first got her out of the water, they had to keep her constantly damp to stop the wood from cracking. Archaeologists had to work under a constant drizzle of water and mud that could be up to 1 meter deep, whilst they were trying to restore her, basically kind of get her to a place where they could save her and take her out safely. So the Vasa now, this is what she looks like now. She's so pretty.
Wow.
And you can
that's under a roof. That's in a building. That
Yeah.
is.
That's the Vasa Museum, which is a place that I've been to.
I've been to see the only ship. I've seen the what's the Tudor, the old
The Mary
Tudor?
Rose.
Yeah, the Mary Rose.
That's at the
Seen
Isle of
Mary
Wight.
Rose.
But so this is the Vasa Museum. It's not damp anymore, so they found
Right.
a preservative to use to keep it intact. I have also been there, and I am a big fan of this museum. As I said, the term Vasa syndrome has become an idiom in business manuals and in Sweden for poorly planned projects, and Vasa has become synonymous with sunken vessels considered to be of great historical importance. Vasa has also made her way into popular culture, including in an educational computer game and a 308-ton reproduction of the ship in Tokyo, which was an on-purpose pastiche where they found out about this and they were like, haha, we could do it, it won't sink. And now it takes tourists sightseeing.
That's really funny.
That's so mean.
Yeah. So you can actually
Dick
go...
move, Japan. Dick move.
So yeah, if you're in Tokyo, you can go for a trip on a reproduction of the Vasa. Also,
If it's a reproduction, how does it stay afloat?
This is actually the big debate. So for a long time, and the kind of urban myth about Vasa is that she had too many guns and they caused her to sink. The reality is that she would have been just fine, because as I mentioned, there were 5 other ships that were pretty much the same model. It was that she was too narrow. And they think that might have been because Master Heinrich had never built a ship with 2 gun decks before. Building a ship with 2 gun decks actually requires a bunch more calculations in terms of the physics of the weight of your boat and how it's standing on the water than a single gun deck was. And because this is the 1600s, they don't really completely understand how all of that physics works. And so essentially the maths was off. And if it had been 3 feet wider, it would have been fine. But because it was, and actually, even if the gunport window, the gunports had just been closed and the water hadn't rushed in through those open gunports, they would also have been fine. But because it was a little bit too narrow, because they didn't have that planning, because Master Heinrich had never made a ship with 2 decks before, it just didn't have the stability it needed. But yeah, it's a fairly easy fix, tragically and kind of ironically. You can build the Vasa without letting it sink, it's just that they didn't. And then the museum has a picture of Arnold Schwarzenegger dressed up as Conan the Barbarian. I don't know why. And I'm hoping to use your YouTube channel to find the answer. So if anyone watching this knows anything about that museum, please tell me. Because I want to know. Why? Because I spent a good 3 or 4 hours Googling this.
I want the audience to know that when I played Upriver Downriver, we did not sink the ship. And actually none of our characters died, even though death is encouraged. So
I really want to play this game. I'm really looking forward to it.
So do I.
Really good.
But yeah, I like big boats and I cannot lie.